A lot of y'all have been asking for a Republican version of my tier list that I did on the Democrats for the 2028 presidential primary. So we've got a lot of people to choose from. And so let's just start with somebody who is really a big name, Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson over and over again has been saying how much he does not want to run. But we've heard that a lot about Michelle Obama, and they're still drafting her to this day to run. Tucker Carlson, somebody who I do like. I have seen him perform in person with Russell Brand, and I think he's a great speaker. However, I think Tucker Carlson is somebody who's pretty controversial. I think he'd be slandered as a conspiracy theorist and is like a far right crazy person. And I feel like he would rebut these claims. However, I feel like the mainstream media would just skewer him in a way that you wouldn't really want to see coming. And also the fact that he got forced out more or less out of Fox kind of indicates that Fox News, when it comes to 2028, might also be just attacking him nonstop because of all the acrimony and bad blood between those two groups. And so that's actually something most people don't pick up on. So while Tucker in isolation could be an A tier candidate, I feel like he'd be a C. I don't think he'd capture the zeitgeist of the Republican Party quite, especially with the moderates that exist and the rhinos. And then also I think the establishment would gun out for him as much as they did for Trump, pretty much. Doug Bergam has no charisma. He's a decent guy, but it doesn't matter. Marjorie Taylor Greene is nuts. She's been more reasonable as of late, as in she's not been in the media so much, but she's generally known as a pariah, or she's not known at all. So I think she'd be a terrible candidate, basically. Allie Stefonic is somebody who could probably appeal to all wings of the party. However, I don't think she has a lot of charisma either. So I don't see her being a strong candidate at all. She'd be like a D. Donald Trump obviously can't run again, so we're just going to put him at the who, even though if he were to run for a third term, that'd be pretty sick. Comment down below if you would want him to run again. Nikki Haley is somebody who is a complete F. She did pretty well in 2024, all things considered. I think she was the last candidate to drop out. However, she really pissed off Trump after Jan 6 with the disavowal. I think that she completely played her cards wrong, and she's a wishy-washy Republican to say the least. And so I think that she would not capture more than 30% of the party's ideology, and she'd do terrible. Francis Suarez is a person who's strong on paper. He's from Florida, which matters less and less with every election. However, he's from Miami as the mayor. And I don't think that's enough of a credential to run for president, even though he tried to last time in 24. He is a Hispanic Cuban, I'm pretty sure, so that's pretty good for optics. However, he doesn't have much past that, so I think he wouldn't do so hot. Greg Abbott is someone who is a governor out of Texas. And if you recall, George W. Bush won 2 terms off the back of being governor of Texas. So that's pretty strong. However, Greg Abbott is not very charisma laden. He is handicapped, which I think is subtly something that will work against him when you're trying to debate people on a stage where the average person is 6 foot tall and the podium is 5 foot tall, and then you have a guy who's on a wheelchair. How the hell does that even work logistically? It would just look, I think it'd be ludicrous. So not his fault, obviously. I think a tree fell on him as he was running 40 years ago. But I mean, I think he'd do horrible. Joe Lombardo, governor out of Nevada. I've never heard him speak. Strong candidate in as much as that's a good credential to have. However, I don't see why he'd have any sort of stick in the Republican Party. So I'd put him at a D. More research to be had, though. Vivek Ramaswamy is someone who, again, has a ton of charisma, fantastic speaker, a genius, really. However, does he even run in the first place, especially when JD is probably going to run and win the primary? I also think that Vivek is struggling from the aspect of his race and ethnicity. He is Indian, which I feel is very unpopular, especially with right-wing voters. That might sound like I'm complaining, but that's just true. I mean, tell me honestly, would Vivek not do better if he were a white Christian? But instead, he is a Indian who's also Hindu, I believe. So that's all things that are going against him. I think he would get a good minority of the vote for sure because he does have a personality cult. However, I don't see him doing much past that. I think he has a glass ceiling, or in that case, a Taj Mahal ceiling. I don't know. Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton has a great legislative record. I used to be a big fan of his back in the day when I was a virgin. However, Tom Cotton does not really have any juice, no charisma. Now he's 6'4". He looks fine. He does have the look for president. He was, I think, an Army Ranger or something very impressive in the military, but he is also very pro-war, and I think that's very much out of style in both parties, to be honest. So I don't think he'd do much in the primary. Now, Will Hurd is a who. Nobody cares about Will Hurd. Mike Pence, I don't think he's going to run, but if he does, he's super unpopular. He did nothing. In fact, in 2024, he ended up with more debt than he did donations. Believe it or not. John James, he's a Republican congressman out of Michigan, which is a good credential. However, not enough to run for president, in my opinion. I believe he is He ran for Senate and lost, which is not good. And I guess if he were to become governor of Michigan, he could have a chance to run for president with enough like clout. However, he doesn't really have that now, so I think he'd be a bad candidate. He's a black, but then again, I feel like a lot of the reason why he even is on the list is that he's a black Republican that exists, because that's quite rare. Tim Scott, exact same problem, even though Tim Scott already ran, so we know how that worked last time. He sucks. He looks like the Buckeyes mascot, very dysgenic, closeted homosexual, allegedly. We don't know. I think I do know. Don't ask me why. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, former press secretary, really not enough of a credential. I know Bill Clinton exists, but Bill Clinton was like a phenomenal politician. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is not really good looking, in my opinion. Subjective opinion. I'm right, by the way. And I just don't see her sticking at all. Josh Hawley is someone who is ideologically very similar to Vance. However, he is more transparently a ladder climber than Vance, in my opinion, which is something that'll rub people the wrong way. I think he tried to relate to people in Appalachia and whatnot in the primary. However, he does come off kind of too polished for that to work. And so for that reason, I think that he'd be a C. I have a lot of friends that grew up on Hawley. By that, I mean that in high school, they worshiped the ground the guy walked on because he's like this like pro-tariff populist. However, that's a very small subsect of the population, okay? Okay, Katie Britt. I think she's a senator out of Alabama, and she is weird. If you remember, she did a State of the Union, which was very awkward, very. It was very like sexual, low key. I don't know. She had like this moaning voice. It was breathy. Very strange. I don't see her as a talent though. She's like Tudor Dixon basically. Don Jr. So here's why I didn't do JD Vance first. JD might actually be in for a rough awakening if Don Jr. were to run. The reason why I say that is because if Don Jr. runs, then that puts Donald Trump Sr. in a weird position where your own firstborn son is running for president, and you have a more competent foil in your vice president currently that you were all but going to endorse, and then your son runs, and it kind of complicates the whole thing. So that might leave the open field open for longer. And so that's interesting. Don Jr. would probably be a B candidate. I've met Don Jr. before. He's a nice guy, and he does have his dad's name, and the support of his father would be crazy in this primary field given JD would be running. So that's an insane dynamic. But if he does get his dad's endorsement, that puts him heads and shoulders above everybody else so far. And Don Jr., I mean, credential wise, I mean, he ran the Trump organization while Trump was in office, which isn't enough in my opinion. And he's the dad's son. So, I mean, at that point, I don't know. That's a weird credential. Like, hey, I'm the son of the president. So, like, I know the ins and outs, but I bet he doesn't. So, that's interesting. I don't know. Chris Sununu is somebody who is not really relevant enough to run. He was a governor out of New Hampshire who won several times and by a lot every time, and that's impressive in and of itself. However, New Hampshire is a small state, number one. Number two, he doesn't have name ID, which is essential, especially if you don't have the most money in the world to put out your name in advertising. And he's not been the most supportive of Trump, and I feel like that's going to be an essential litmus test, especially if Trump's approval is high in 2028, for people to say that, hey, I supported Trump through thick and thin. I'll be there for you guys as well. He cannot say that. Christie, he did okay in 2024, and he was formidable in 2016. However, his time passed by in 2012, I believe. He's fat, still fat. He's fat, and very unlikable, very anti-Trump. That's not going to fly. I doubt he even runs. Kim Reynolds, super unpopular governor out of Iowa. That's an F. Kristi Noem. Now think about it this way. Her credentials are she was governor of South Dakota, pretty unpopular given all the Republican largesse there, and she still did not do too well in those elections in 2018 and 22. She is the DHS secretary, I believe, or CBP secretary, which in and of itself is not that good of a credential, to be honest. It's not governor of a big state. It's not secretary of state like Rubio. It is, like the 10th most powerful cabinet spot, and that's not good enough in my opinion. So that's important. Also, Kristi Noem's kind of a bimbo. I mean, she's really pretty when she puts on the TV makeup. I give her that. However, past that, not much is behind her. She'd do worse than Michelle Bachmann, in my opinion. Now that puts my age into real-time light. Okay, I'm 22, but I do remember 2012. Glenn Youngkin, interesting candidate. He's kind of strong in the fact that he won Virginia in 2021, which is fascinating, very impressive. He's 6'5", which is a good thing. Okay, height matters. The more domineering you are in a room full of other candidates, the better you look. Remember Little Marco? Little Marco is like 5'9", and he's fine height-wise, but when he's next to Trump, who's like 5 inches taller, or Jeb Bush, who's like 6'5", it makes him look like a little kid. And that's what kind of made him look bad in 2016, aside from all the other robotic moments he had. So I think Glenn Youngkin does have that going for him. However, by 2028, he would have been out of office for about 2 years. And odds are the Democrats are going to take back the governorship under Abigail Spanberger. So his legacy won't look that good. And so, honestly, I don't know how strong of a candidate he'd be, how good of a candidate he'd be at that point. Also, part of winning in Virginia in the first place was somewhat distancing himself from Trump post J6, which I understand. However, if we're going to do a diehard Trump loyalty test for the votes to be yours in 2028, he's not really the top of the list anyway. So I would say he is a C candidate because, again, JD could say he's more pro-Trump because he was the VP. Glenn Youngkin is going to be falling to the wayside, assuming he doesn't pick up another job after the governorship. So it's not going to look too good. Brian Kemp. Now, Brian Kemp is someone who is very strong electorally in Georgia, which is good. However, he countersignaled Trump when it mattered during the whole Stop the Steal thing. And so that's going to pretty much disqualify him from the jump. I think Trump would actively sabotage him if he were to run. Mike Pompeo is someone who's kind of similarly did the same thing, distancing himself from Trump, getting on Ozempic, and then looking worse after somehow. So anyway, I think he'd be a D candidate. He has credentials, of course, but that's not much when you're not likable. Mike Lee. Mike Lee would be an F candidate as well. He's a senator out of Utah, which is useless, obviously. Paging Romney on that one. Secondly, Mike Lee is kind of just a dork. He's balding very badly. He's got to shave it off, man. And he's just like a policy wonk libertarian, and that's not going to fly. Think about Ted Cruz with less charisma, if that's possible. Liz Cheney, automatic F. Dude, come on. She'd be guaranteed to get less votes than Nikki Haley somehow. Byron Donalds. Fascinating choice. Byron Donalds is one of the most eloquent politicians out there. Probably the best speaking black dude in the Republican Party by far. Again, not saying much because we are going against Tim Scott, but still. Byron Donalds, super impressive guy. Good story. Like I said, super articulate, can defend all the MAGA policies. Fantastic candidate in that respect. He's running for governor of Florida, which is a great credential to have. And so that's good. However, he's running against Casey DeSantis, and the race seems to be quite close. So for that reason, you don't know, because if he's only a congressman by 2028, I don't think he'll have enough clout to demand the primary audience to give him attention. However, if he is the governor of Florida and he's doing a good job as of 26, when he declares in 27, I think he'd look really good. I doubt he runs because he's too young anyway, but him in his 40s would still be pretty formidable. I think he'd be a B candidate just because I don't know if he's going to win the governorship or not. But if he did, he'd be more of an A candidate. But he's a little young, like I said. Matt Gaetz would be an F candidate. Now, he would definitely get the MAGA base, which is the essential part of winning. However, the next part would be to get some of the establishment support, whether that be Mike Johnson or the Kevin McCarthy types. He's definitely not getting that support. He's a pariah among a lot of the people in power nowadays, called the swamp, okay? So if you don't have that going on for you, you're probably not going to win. And honestly, Trump was a fluke, and Matt Gaetz, if you compare it to Trump, is stupid. Matt Gaetz is one of the people that skinwalks the Trump orbit. He's one of the people that are MAGA, and by the way, he's kind of a D-bag in person, not going to lie. And, the people that copy Trump are generally going to have his support minus some people that are more fickle. And when you're running for president, you need the Trump people and then maybe some more on top of that, okay? So he's just not going to make it. He's really just like a one notch removed away from a Marjorie Taylor Greene type. Now, to address Ted Cruz is somebody who's desperate to become president, and I don't see that in the cards for him. He's in his 50s now. He has more experience under his belt than 2016. He grew a beard, so that's good. Now he's a Lion Ted instead of Lion Ted. However, I feel like Ted Cruz still does not really have the prerequisite charisma to command an audience more than half a dozen of the people on this list anyway. And so I don't think he'd do too well. I think he has a little bit of I don't know, he just doesn't have enough command of the zeitgeist in the Republican Party right now to really have a strong run, in my opinion. So I think he'd be a D candidate. Plus, he's from Texas, and Texas won't matter in 28 as a state. It's not a swing state by that logic. Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis I love to hate, and I'm glad he lost in 24. And I think the loss in 24 tells you how he's going to lose in 28. Bottom line is that by him running against Trump in 24, no matter how he cozies up to him afterwards, we'll basically lose him a lot of love and favor from diehard MAGA fans, even if Trump doesn't attack him personally. So I think Ron DeSantis is really like a fallen angel from the Trump orbit. And so for that reason, I think he'd be an F candidate, okay? Otherwise, again, great governor, all things considered. Florida is ran beautifully. I've been there multiple times. It's a great state. However, his life decisions thus far have been terrible. And And his and if his wife loses the governorship in Florida, that's even worse. Call that a kill shot. Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio has seen his stock skyrocket in the past 6 months. He's been a longtime senator out of Florida. He had a terrible run for president in 2016. Again, he was pretty big in that campaign. However, he came off like a pretentious person that was I would say premature in his run for president. Dollar store Obama, really. Anyway, he is a Cuban, which is good for the Hispanic support. However, it'd be better if you were Mexican, like yours truly. Anyway, Marco Rubio does have appeal to the MAGA base broadly, and then also the establishment as well, as seen by his wild landslide victory in the Senate confirmation when he became Secretary of State, which gets me to his credentials. Again, 3 or 4 term senator out of Florida is great. That's enough to be president at that point. However, if you're Secretary of State on top of that, that's even better. So that's pretty good. I think he has really good credentials to run for president. However, I do think that he doesn't have the charisma of a lot of other people on the list, though. So that's one weakness. And the thing is that while Secretary of State is the third most powerful thing in the cabinet, I believe that J.D. Vance being the VP is better. Now, as a candidate, I say J.D. Vance would be an S tier. Now, here's why. Is JD my favorite politician? No. Is he even the best politician? No. Is he the best speaker? No. Is he the best looking one, the tallest one? No. However, he's well rounded enough to where I think he could get the Trump vote. Now, this is assuming Don Jr. doesn't run, because I don't think Don Jr. would. Because obviously that would make it awkward with Don Sr. then endorsing someone out of the two. But assuming he more or less, and this is how I predict it goes. The primary starts, Trump sits it out for a couple months, see how it plays out, lets JD debate a couple times, see if he's going to stand up to the rest of the guys. And then once JD even holds his own, he'll already come in with a lead anyway. If he maintains the lead for a couple months, I think Trump at that point would say, okay, you're a good enough successor. Here you go. Here's the endorsement. And then let's say JD at that point in a field of 12 people has 20% of the support and the plurality. I believe that the Trump endorsement would get him to like 60%. And basically by a couple weeks after that, I think the field would be eliminated. Everybody would drop out and support JD, aside from the Nikki Haley types. And I think JD would basically win the primary pretty easily with the Trump endorsement. And so that's why he's a great candidate. Again, this is for the primary, and I'm not really emphasizing the 2020 general election because we don't know who the Democrat is. So anyways, pretty long video. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want more content like this. And then also comment below what you think I did wrong on this tier list. What would you change? Let me know. I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.